Jayne from Poppy Patchwork, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make an 8-inch block called Fanny's Favourite. So I've drawn out the block in my quilt block notebook and I've written down the measurements for what we're going to need. I sell this book on Amazon and it comes with blank pages for you to draw out your own designs, and you might find that useful. I've designed this quilt block notebook which I use when I'm planning out the blocks that I'm going to do videos for, and you may find it useful. You can buy it from Amazon, and if you scan this code using your phone, it'll take you straight to the Amazon page for it. Now let's get quilting. So to make this block you're going to need, in background fabric, 4 2¼ inch squares and 4 1 3/4 by 2 3/4 inch rectangles. In fabric A you're going to need 4 1½ inch squares, 4 1 3/4 inch squares, 2 3 by 4 inch rectangles and 1 2½ inch square. In fabric B you're going to need 8 1½ by 2½ inch rectangles and 4 2½ inch squares. And in fabric C you're going to need 1 3 3/4 inch by 3 3/4 inch square. So this block is made up of squares, rectangles, flying geese and cat's cradles. So we're going to start by making the flying geese, and for this we're going to need this large square in fabric C and the small squares in the background fabric. Now all other fabrics I'm going to put to one side. So we're going to be making the flying geese using the 4 at a time method. And so for this, we're going to draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of the small background squares. So I'm going to place the background square in one of the corners, right sides together with the large square. And I'm going to place another square in the opposite corner. And when you do this, the diagonal line that you've drawn on those squares must run from here to here. I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the drawn line. So I'm now going to cut along the drawn line. And then I'm going to set the seam and press. So I'm setting the seam and pressing towards the small triangles. So now I'm going to add another square to the other corner. And this time the diagonal line needs to run from this corner and through the join over here. And I'm going to pin it in place. And repeat with the 4th square. So I'm going to take those back over to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the drawn line. So I'm going to remove the pins and then I'm going to cut through the drawn line. And once again, I'm going to set the seam and press towards the small triangle. Now we need to trim the flying geese. I like to use the Ultimate Flying Geese tool designed by Deb Heatherly for Creative Grids. If you do not have one of these, then right mouse click on the link above and it will take you to my video on how to trim flying geese with the standard ruler. And when you're trimming with the standard ruler, you need to trim it to 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Using the ruler, this flying geese tool, I'm going to line up, cut trim number 1 with the B lines. So the point on the triangle lines with the point on the lines, and then you trim up one side and along the top. You then turn the unit round and you turn the ruler round. And again, you line the B lines up with the point on the triangle, and then you trim along one side and then along the top. So I'm going to continue that with the other 3 pieces. So we have 4 flying geese and we're going to set those to one side. So now we're going to do the cat's cradle unit. And for this we're going to need the 4 1¾ by 1¾ squares, the 2 3 by 4 inch rectangles, and in background fabric the 4 1¾ by 2¾ rectangles. So we're going to start by joining the rectangles together along the short edge. So we're going to take those to sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to set the seam and press them towards the square. So now I'm going to join these like a 4 patch, except you'll see that the seam isn't in the centre. That's okay, that's what we want. So I'm going to take these over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm going to fold these in half, just finger press where that is, and then with my small scissors I'm going to snip down to the seam line. Don't cut the seam, but get close to the seam. And now we're going to press. So now that we have snipped down to that seam, the seams can go in opposite directions. So I want to press them so that they lie flat. So I'm pressing them, in this case, away from the squares. And so your pieces should now look like this. So now we've got the 2 rectangles and we're going to place them right sides together like this. Now I have a cat's cradle tool which has been designed by Deb Heatherly for Creative Grids. And what you need to do with this is you're going to be placing the lines on the ruler on the seam line, and then you're going to be drawing along the edge of the ruler. And you repeat that on the other side as well. So if you don't have one of these rulers, you can just draw that line on anyway, but it has to intersect this seam. Then you're going to sew on top of the line, those 2 lines that you've just drawn, making sure that you cross over, you sew on top of that, or just to one side of that cross where these 2 pieces join. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to do this one first and show you what it looks like. I'm just removing those pins. Now you may be able to see the stitch line has started here, gone through the apex here, or the crossover of seams here, and down to the point here. The ruler line was a little bit off, and similarly it's gone from here through the point down to the corner, and once again that ruler line that I drew was a little bit off. So once you've done that, you then get your ruler and you cut a 1/4 inch away from both of those stitch lines. Now you can just cut down the centre, but it does leave a slightly bigger seam allowance if you do that. So I'm going to come back and do those in a minute, but I want to show you what this looks like. So I'm going to press it open now. So I'm going to set the seams and I'm going to press towards the large triangle. again I'm going to set the seams and press towards the large triangle. So there you go, that's what it looks like. So I'm going to do that with the other two pieces. I'm not going to lay them together just yet. I am going to mark the lines on the back of here. Now what you can do is you can, if you don't have one of those tools, you can line the 45-degree line on the edge of your piece here, and then making sure that you're going through the stitching at this point, you're going to mark to this corner here and over here. So let me do that. So the 45-degree line here, into the corner here, and through the stitching here. And I'm going to turn it around and do it in the other direction. So again, we're going to get that 45-degree line on the edge here. I'm going to line it up in the corner and have it crossing through the stitching here in the center. Now I'm going to lay it right sides together with the rectangle and pin it in place. I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and sew on top of the lines. So I've removed the pins. You can flip this back to see if you're happy with your points before you cut. Yep, I'm happy with those. So again, we're going to cut a 1/4 inch away from those sewn lines. And now I'm going to press. So now we need to trim these. Okay, so the finished size of the block will be 2 inches. So using this cat's cradle trimming tool, place the box on the 2-inch markings. And then we trim up one side and down the other. We then twist the unit around and we now line the 2-inch line on the stitch line with this point on the point of our square here, and this line running through the corner here, and then we trim up one side and along the other side. So this is now going to finish at 2.5 inches, so that when we sew it into the block, it's a finished size of 2 inches. So with a standard ruler, you lay the diagonal line on the long stitch line, and then where it intersects here with this corner piece, you're going to line that up at 1 1/4, because 1 1/4 is half of 2.5, and then you're going to cut up one side and along the other side. Then you're going to rotate this around, and again you're going to line that diagonal line on the main stitch line, and this time you're going to line the bottom and the left edges at exactly 2.5, and you will see that it intersects at 1.25. Then we're going to go up, and trim along the top. So I'm going to do the other two using the cat's cradle trim tool. So now we've made 4 cat cradle units. Now we're ready to do block layout. So all the pieces are now laid out in block layout. So we're going to join these pairs together and then pop these on the end, and then we're going to join the columns together. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so I've laid this out and I'm going to start by pressing the middle piece, and I'm going to press the seams away from the flying geese and then the centre seams I'm going to press out, and these centre seams I'm going to press in, and so they should now nest together. So this section should be the same as this section. So we're going to press these seams out and these seams into the middle. And then these seams should be those are going out. These are going to be pressed into the middle. These, either side of the flying geese, are being pressed out, and these are being pressed into the middle. And now they should nest. I'm going to take those to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to set the seams and then press them open. So as I'm laying it back out in block order, I can see that I've done it incorrectly. Because this triangle piece should be pointing inwards. So I'm going to unpick that and then come back to block layout. So I've unpicked it and I've laid it back out in block order, and now I'm going to pin together two of these seams. So I'm going to take those over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm now going to set the seams and press them open. And so now I've got the last seam to do. So I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. And now I'm going to set the seam and press it open. Congratulations! You've made Fanny's favourite quilt block. It measures 8.5 inches at the moment, and once you sew it into a quilt, it will measure 8 inches. I hope you've enjoyed these videos, and thank you very much for all your support by downloading my patterns and buying my books. Bye for now and happy quilting!